Thank you, Mario Kart Tour, for everything you've done, but it's time to move forward. However, I'm not done with this game quite yet, as there is one last thing that I need to tackle first. I need to cover all of the Nitro courses and Remix courses in the game, but I'll save it until next year.
All I gotta say is, this didn't take a year to complete. Thank God. If there was one thing that always gets me excited for in Mario Kart Tour, more than the return of familiar and new tracks of old, it would be the brand new courses that would come up every now and then, usually with its own assigned tour and everything. Nitro courses are always such an exciting aspect of any Mario Kart game, mostly because it sometimes brings in new concepts and surprises that are either expanded upon or haven't been seen yet. In Mario Kart Tour's case, the main central point for these new tracks are the ones based in real-life cities. Whether it's famous places like New York City and London, or unexpected surprises such as Bangkok and Berlin. It's not to say that all of these tracks are based on the real world though, because there's even a few courses that are based on the Mushroom Kingdom proper. From driving inside of a ninja temple to exploring the sunken ruins of Piti Purana, a good part of these original courses are fairly creative. But it only leaves one question. Which of these tracks are the best that Mario Kart Tour has to offer? Well, that's what this video is for, right? I mean, it is a follow-up for this reason. Before we get started though, I'd like to lay down some ground rules. You know how the deal goes. Firstly, considering that most of the courses here have reappeared in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe as part of the Boosted Course Pass, I'm not going to be ranking those versions here on this list. This is a strictly Tour exclusive ranking. Although, I will briefly mention the 8 Deluxe versions if I feel it's necessary. So if you were expecting me to also rank the remakes here, then you're looking at the wrong place. Secondly, while there isn't any issue with the 7 original Nitro courses, the cities are a bit more complicated as most of them are split into 3 different variants. A very select few even have 4 instead. Rather than individually ranking the city tracks one by one, I'll be ranking them as a whole just to make this video a little more consistent. I will be including the little card on each city track to show what score they've received individually and as a contributor to their placement on the city tracks proper. Lastly, this is all just my personal opinion, if it wasn't obvious enough. Actually, Mario Kart Tour is already controversial enough, so I mean, do you get what you're asking for, I guess? With all the rules laid down, it's time to catch a plane flight and do some sightseeing on a journey to find what the best track is in all of Mario Kart Tour. And to start us off is unfortunately the lower end. Let's get started, shall we? Is anyone really surprised that Tokyo Blur ended up in last place? Okay, I mean, there might be some, but let me explain myself here to those that defend this track. It might be useless, I don't know. When this track first came out, I recall seeing a lot of players disappointed with how it turned out. Of course, I didn't initially think of this, as I thought it was a cool idea to have Tokyo be in Tour at all. It is one of the most famous cities ever. Years later, and yeah, no, this sucks. For a track being based in Tokyo, Japan, you know, where Nintendo's located, the overall track itself is incredibly simple, with many of it being left as just either underwhelming or incredibly boring. Sure, there's some interesting spots like the Rainbow Bridge and the Tokyo Tower, but the tracks themselves are just nothing. The first variant has you take a U-turn, followed by going under a tunnel, and after passing a shortcut ramp, that's about it. That's the entire experience. The second is a little more interesting, since you actually go through the Kenimarimon, and there's some swamps, but otherwise, it's just as underwhelming as the first. The third, however, is probably one of the worst variants, since you spend a portion of the track on the Shuto Expressway, and that's about it. This track just ends up with me feeling bored most of the time, and that really sucks since Tokyo is a really nice looking city with a lot to look forward to, especially at night. I mean, why couldn't it take place at night? It's just a shame that the course itself is just dull and boring, and I can honestly see why so many people just aren't a fan of this. Of course, there are some actual fans of this track, but like, you know who you are.
Ice cream!
And now here's our first original course on the list. Sky High Sunday is a track that's probably more known for being, quote unquote, the first Nitro in the Booster Course pass. Read it and weep, guys, because it's not. When I initially played it, I felt extremely underwhelmed with the track being basically Excitebike Arena with extra steps and forced anti-gravity. Needless to say, it wasn't a good first impression. The Tour version is a bit better, but it's still not great. At the very least, it is enforced with anti-gravity, so it's a lot more natural this way. The music itself is also nice, so I can't be too mad over it. But there's only so much you could do with a layout like this. It's a shame too, because a concept like it is really nice, and if done with a better layout, it could have been decent at most. As it stands, Sky High Sunday is just kind of a bland track with an underwhelming layout, and that's as much as I'm gonna say about it. Whew. Now we're moving past F tier and onto D tier, tracks that I don't flat out dislike, but I couldn't really care less if I played them comparatively.
Can you believe it, guys? Just a week away.
It's not controversial to have Merry Mountain be this low, is it? I hope not. To be completely honest, I never really cared for this track, not since I first played it either. But why is that? Well, firstly, Merry Mountain is one of the first courses in the non-city category, being not based on a real city. And I gotta say, it definitely delivers with its Christmas theme. I'm kinda surprised we haven't gotten anything like this in Mario Kart yet. But regardless, I love the way this course looks with the town you start at, all the way up to the Christmas present sitting on top of the mountain. If that doesn't scream Christmas enough, then the music has that covered, as it's filled with that jolly goodness that I expected for a Christmas themed track. It's just a shame that the overall layout is just aggressively okay. It starts out strong enough with a split path you can take, either on road or on the train tracks, but it all goes downhill fast once you hit the titular mountain, because there's just nothing of note there. Just a turn and a long straightaway with one single boost panel, some coins to potentially keep a combo. That's extremely underwhelming, and I haven't even bothered to mention the half pipes. Why would you ever go there? Not only waste your time, but also place further back. At least the sound is nice when you trick off of it. While Merry Mountain delivers on its festive atmosphere and music, the track overall is just nothing extremely special. I don't typically mind simple courses, but this is an instance where I wish it was a little more ambitious. But hey, at least it's not last place, so there's that. Now please don't put me on the naughty list, Santa Bowser.
British people wake up in a bathtub full of ice with their kidneys gone, be like, right, it's all this then.
This may not be as bad as Tokyo Blur, but London Loop is just as meh as it. Doesn't help that this track is based in the UK. Wow, what a funny UK joke, Golden, really classy there. London Loop is just a dull feeling track to me. There isn't a lot for me to go over with in particular, so let's make this fairly quick. London Loop 1 has you go past Big Ben, go inside the Leadenhall Market, before dodging a chain chop and going through the Tower Bridge. London 2 is a bit more interesting with you going through St. James Park where a lot of chain chomps reside, but quickly falls apart as you drive through more streets. Very riveting stuff. London 3 has the London Eye at River Thames, is that really how it's pronounced? And goes backwards for some reason. Yeah, it sucks. The only thing I like from London Loop is really its second variant in music, but otherwise it's just nothing special and oftentimes kinda and a bit dull. Not much else to really say, so let's move on.
Well, off to visit your mother.
Oh, Paris Promenade. This one is a bit tricky to discuss. For the longest time, I could not recall what the track played like for any of its three variants. It wasn't up until the 2023 Spring Tour that it suddenly became somewhat common. At least I thought it was. The system just makes me confused, man. Now that I've played through all three, I can see why I never remembered the original versions. The issue that I have with some of the city tracks is that oftentimes one or two of the variants always ends up being identical to the other. And while it's never been a huge issue, at least to me, Paris Promenade unfortunately suffered the hardest out of the bunch, although there are definitely worse examples. The first variant is probably the best out of the three since it's most notable for having you driving under the Eiffel Tower. Paris Promenade 2 also has you drive under the tower as well, but it's nowhere near as memorable. It also, for some reason, has you drive backwards, and I don't know when I'll get to mention this ever, but it also has a little shortcut through here. I just thought it was neat because this was not in the console version. And Paris Promenade 3 is kinda like the first variant, but it takes you through a detour of the path that looks like an off-road. At the very least, the atmosphere is okay, I suppose. It gets the job done, and the music is lovely enough for it to fit this track. But even so, this might be one of the more forgettable tracks for me, and I can't blame myself for not remembering what each of them played like back then. I guess it's for the best that it was made simple in 8 Deluxe? I don't know.
Where would he go?
Connecticut!
Being that this is the first city track ever released for Mario Kart Tour, it's expected to be simple. And yeah, it sure is a textbook definition of simple, alright. Being based on one of the most popular cities in America, it's got everything from Times Square to the Empire State Building to even the 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Of course, it's not New York without the Statue of the Statue of Liberty. I don't know where that got slipped. Although weirdly, you could barely see it at all. As for the tracks themselves, it's incredibly basic and it doesn't leave a lot to remember. The first two are almost identical to each other, with the second taking a slightly different direction. And even though New York Minute 3 is one of the better variants, I mean, you go through the 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and I mean, this turn is pretty cool. It still ends up being a pretty basic track otherwise. I will say though that I guess because the track itself is generally set at night, the atmosphere and visuals look a little decent at most, and the music, I don't know, the music is pretty weird. Some say it sounds a lot like what New York sounds like, others say it's more akin to something like New Orleans. Whatever the debate goes, I just think the music is just pretty decent. Otherwise said, New York Minute does the job well, though I honestly wished it was one of the later city tracks released, given how simple it is compared to the rest of its peers. Not a bad track. In fact, I'd lie if I said it wasn't somewhat amusing. It's just kind of average all around. Also, shout out to New York Minute for not appearing in any other tour since its first appearance until way later. That was my favorite part of the whole game. Alright, here's a quick intermission before we continue any further. So, this track and Tokyo Blur are the only two in the entire game to have a fourth variant. And the reason why I didn't mention it for Tokyo Blur earlier is because I wanted to save it for a kind of a group ranking, so consider this a bit of a pit stop for now. So with both of these fourth versions, they kind of combine all of them into a cohesive track, and the results kind of varied quite a bit. It's not what you expected out of a game like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, for example. No, these tracks just kind of make strange compromises. And to be completely honest, they really wouldn't affect the ranking because, well, it wouldn't really be fair if I counted them and somehow the placements for both Tokyo Blur and New York Minute just gets higher because these turn out to be the best ones. With that said, I did determine that out of the two fourth variants released, I liked Tokyo Blur's the best because it actually feels like a racetrack. New York Minute 4 isn't, I guess it's not awful, but I don't really love the way it's executed either. It just feels really clunky for my liking. And yeah, that's really about it. So, intermission over, let's get back to the actual video. Amsterdam Drift is a bit tricky for me to talk about. It's, well, it's a track, I'll say that. I feel like despite how varied the variants are in and of themselves, I always feel like there was something about these that either felt off, or an issue that prevented these three from being anywhere above its placement at low C. But how so? Well, Amsterdam Drift 1 is kind of an alright course to start off with, despite the first bad impressions with the visuals. You do take a stroll through the fields surrounded by windmills and Monty moles, before jumping right back into the city. I will say that the ramp here looks off. I think you know why. Amsterdam Drift 2, however, man, this one's rough. If you've seen my Retro Courses video on this game, then you already know how much I despise the water controls of it, and this is no different. I appreciate the devs for using the canals of Amsterdam to spice up some variety, but really I don't feel much for it, and combined with the consistent difficulty of even keeping a combo, and you got yourself a track that not only fills me with boredom, but also some frustration at times. Trust me, I really just do not like this one at all. Thankfully, Amsterdam Drift 3 picks things up again with a lovely view of the Keukenhof tulip fields, and piranha plants ready to bite you. But the last few turns can get kinda awkward. Not as awkward as what happened in lap 3 for 8 Deluxe, but still off considering we're working with Tour's controls. As stated earlier, when I first played this track, the visuals just left a bad first impression as I thought it just looked pretty ugly, but these days I just think they're pretty decent-ish. With some parts looking a little off like the strange cut in grass here and whatever's going on in Amsterdam Drift 2. And the music is pretty nice, if not a bit empty compared to the other version we got in Wave 4. Amsterdam Drift overall just disappoints me, because it has things that I absolutely like. It could have been so much better, but alas, this isn't what we're stuck with. At least I don't dislike it as much as my first impressions, but I wouldn't say it impressed me anymore.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie.
Now, this is a track that initially I actually thought was pretty decent, but as I played more of it, the less I liked playing on it. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think it's an overall decent track for what it is, but I have more issues with it than when I first played it back at the night tour. Romavanti 1 does start things strong with you going through the Colosseum, which I thought was pretty cool. But after you go through some ruins and the Piazza de Campidoglio, the track loops back to the start. Kinda odd, but sure. Romavanti 2 takes you to a different path, going through the Piazza di Spagna, and eventually the Piazza Navona, where there are rocky wrenches to destroy. All this to say that Romavanti 2 is just fine. Nothing really notable other than the plaza itself. Romavanti 3, however, is my favorite out of the three. While you do return to the Colosseum and Piazza Navona, chain chomps now occupy the bottom of the Colosseum, biting you as well as making these trickable ramps impossible to take without getting hit at times. Thanks, Nintendo. The plaza also now has a glider ramp with fuzzies circling around a couple of coins before the finish line. While Romavanti 3 is the better variant, the track as a whole is just from its first two variants. The atmosphere is fine enough, and even though I don't think the music feels fitting, it's okay to listen to at the very least and suits Italy fairly well. Actually thinking about it, it might actually grow on me a little bit. Overall, not a bad track, but not one I would be excited to see whenever it comes around, which is, I guess, once a year? Damn Nintendo, you could have made some of these tracks appear more than once at least. I feel like this placement might stir up some controversy, given how much praise this one gets in its console counterpart. And I mean, I did enjoy Sydney Sprint in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. It's one of my favorite city tracks in that game, and I could definitely see where people are coming from when they declare it as one of the best, even though it's probably not that anymore. However, I can't really say the same for its original incarnation here. I don't know what it is about it, but it never really gave me the same excitement as I felt with its other version. I always saw it as just kinda in my book. Sydney Sprint 1 is fine, going through the Opera House, passing Luna Park, and seeing passengers throw out items from the train at the Sydney Harbour is really neat, but otherwise nothing too crazy. Sydney Sprint 2, however, it kinda sucks. I know some of the other city tracks are also guilty with this kind of caliber, but the fact that you drive backwards here and it's considered a normal variant bothers me more than any other track, not to mention it's nearly the same as one with extra steps to really think about it. I sure do love driving through this patch of field. Thanks, Nintendo. Sydney Sprint 3 is a bit better though, in part due to the sneak peek we got in 8 Deluxe, but by itself it's just okay. At least the music sounds good, but even that couldn't save this one for being mediocre in Tour. Once again, I'm glad that the adjustments I got in 8 Deluxe benefits the experience. I just mentioned Mario Kart 8 Deluxe 4 times now. Stu, shut up.
So, I'm sorry, Nintendo ninjas, but you're gonna have to leave me alone because we're doing nothing wrong.
If Sydney Sprint's placement isn't going to rile up some controversy, then this surely will. I just have a hunch, you know? Compared to the console version, the original version of Ninja Hideaway is just okay. I didn't hate my time playing on it, but there's just something about it here that doesn't feel right. Don't get me wrong, the track itself visually looks nice. The obstacles are interesting with ninja star ceilings and ninja shy guys, although why couldn't they be ninjas? Whatever. And the multiple branching pathways are a neat concept. I think it all comes down to how Tour plays, and, well, it felt restrictive. Like, if I wanted to drop down to a different part of the track, the game either doesn't let me or counts it as a respawn. Which is a bit dumb, but sometimes it'll allow me anyways. It's just hard to describe. Not to mention the music is not the best in this game. Not bad by any means, but it definitely sounds better in 8 Deluxe, whereas here it just kinda sounds a bit muffled. I will give praise where praise is due. I do like the general atmosphere and vibe of this entire track. I just think it's pretty nice overall. You know, obviously restricted by Tour's visuals, but hey, it counts for something at least. Even though Ninja Hideaway is one of the best courses to many in its console debut, here it's just alright, at least to me. Now, don't you dare come to my house with a bonsai build because I have my ninjas with me. What do you mean I don't have ninjas? Oh, would you look at that, we've officially hit the midway point for this list. I guess it's time to take a break from the cities and nitros and focus on something different. Yes, I really just pulled this one from Stray Phyllis. Man, I really like this guy, huh? RMX Tracks. Now, these are a strange case. These are new tracks, but they mostly use the SNES courses as a base, with the only other one using GBA Bowser Castle instead. Still, these tracks have different layouts with a gimmick usually attached to them, so they're still going to be classified as new tracks. Oh hey look, they finally got the expansion pass for Super Mario Kart. For this section, I'm going to be ranking these separately from the others since they're a different type of track, and a video about them after this? Nah, that just seems underwhelming. So, without further ado, let's get this out of the way and rank the 10 remix courses separately. If you're asking about battle mode, I made an entire different video about it and I kind of ranked these tracks there, so yeah, let's just move on. Number 10, Remix Choco Island 1. Wow, I sure love the straight lines and a couple of ramps. It's just a shame that I get little enjoyment out of this track, and the fact that Choco Island already looks bad in this game doesn't help much at all. At least the music is okay, even if it only reminds me of hell. Number 9, Remix Choco Island 2. I mean, at least it's kinda interesting. The beginning shortcut is pretty neat, but then it just leads to this long straightaway with ramps and I don't know, I have nothing to say for this one. Also, just take what I said from before with the visuals and music and boom! Even in remix form, Choco Island just fails to impress me all that much. Number 8, Remix Bowser Castle 1. The only GBA track of its kind, and it kinda blows. The layout is a very glorified L. The conveyor belts felt weirdly out of place. Although I do like the shortcut at the end changing by lap 2. And overall it's just, well, it just kinda exists. That's basically the whole thing in a nutshell. Remember when people actually thought this was supposed to be SNES Bowser Castle 3 until Bowser Castle 3 got released and it turned out that this and GBA are different? Yeah, that was funny. Fuck you Nintendo for doing this shit. Number 7, Remix Rainbow Road 2. First off, just seeing an SNES Rainbow Road with numbers feels cursed. Secondly, this track is just incredibly forgettable, although that's not really a high bar to cross, but I think half of these are forgettable. All it has going for it are these bouncing mushrooms and that's about it. I guess it is somewhat entertaining sometimes, but I'd rather take its older brother than this. Speaking of, number 6, Remix Rainbow Road 1. It's incredibly simple with it just being a figure 8 surrounded by asteroids, but I don't know, it just has that odd unique charm to it. If it were a little more involved, then maybe I might have ranked it higher, but as it stands, it's just whatever, not much to say. Number 5, Remix Mario Circuit 1. Now we're getting to the decent stuff. While Remix Mario Circuit 1 isn't anything extraordinary and only has, I guess the blocks as its main gimmick, this track still feels like it has some semblance of substance attached, and luckily enough, I do like the visuals and music of SNES Mario Circuit, so yeah, decent overall, but nothing worth talking over. Number 4, Remix Ghost Valley 1. Holy shit guys, look, is that elevation in my Super Mario Kart track? We are actually screwed as a society. This is unheard of. This is before Bowser Castle 3, shut up. Jokes aside, this remix take of Ghost Valley isn't the most crazy or anything, but as I've said before, even some of the more simple tracks really amuses me, and it just really felt fun to drive in this abandoned pier. Even if there's no real gimmicks, other than I guess the elevation, this track is still worth a play or two, assuming you can catch it in any tour it arrives in. If only the visuals didn't look bright and less spooky, but what can you do? I guess this also contributes to my Ghost Valley bias. I really love the Ghost Valley tracks, guys. They're super underrated. Number 3, Remix Vanilla Lake 1. Okay, I know this sounds insane, but hear me out. Compared to the originals, the Remix Vanilla Lakes blow these out by a wide margin, and each have their own gimmicks to keep it fresh. While Remix Vanilla Lake 1 isn't that interesting in terms of layout, the geysers, penguins, and even cracked ice makes this one a whole lot more interesting. Combined with the decent visuals and charming little music, and you got what should have been the actual Vanilla Lake, but I simply prefer its sibling, which is number 2, Remix Vanilla Lake 2. For being one of the last remix tracks, this one definitely delivers, in my opinion. It actually feels like there is some life put into it, with you driving under igloos, gliding over one, and even a split path near the end. Remix Vanilla Lake 2 definitely surprised me in more ways than one. But despite all that, it doesn't beat out my personal favorite remix track. That being number 1, Remix Donut Plains 1. Let's go, baby! My Donut Plains 1 bias is striking through. This is a different track than that. To this day, I'm still in awe at how this track turned out. The layout feels more like a refined take of Donut Plains 3. The plant life here makes this track visually look pleasing, as well as incorporates them into the gameplay, even though they're basically just glorified mushrooms. And the fact that most of the track takes place within a lake is just wow. I guess it also helps that I generally have a soft spot for the Donut Plains tracks, so there's that. Without a doubt, my personal favorite remix track in Tour. I sure hope there's a second one. Oh wait. And that's all of them. They may not be the most exciting or interesting parts of the game, but they can shine when at their absolute best. It does kinda bother me that there's about 4 tracks without a second version, but that's small in the grand scheme of things. With all that out of the way, let's resume back to the Nitro courses. Just a reminder that these tracks are probably never going to come back ever again.
Hey, if we're underwater, how could there be a...
Out of all of the Nitro courses in this game, Piranha Plant Cove is one of the most interesting tracks I've ever played. I wasn't sure what to think of it fully, as first impressions left me with a mediocre view. But as of the Exploration Tour, where I got to replay the first 2 variants, as well as the Mead Tour, which has Piranha Plant Cove 3, I think I'm a bit more positive on the tracks as a whole. Maybe not one of them, but 2 of them is pretty good. I'm getting ahead of myself though, so let's run it down. Piranha Plant Cove is unique from the other Nitro courses, as it's the only non-city to get the 3 route treatment. That in itself is interesting already, but how's the tracks themselves? Piranha Plant Cove 1 takes place in a ruins area, with some jumps and a split path before diving down and dodging swamps. It's decent enough, and I did have fun with it. It definitely helps that the general atmosphere for all of these tracks seems to take place within a sunken, forgotten ruins, which elevates this a lot more than it needed to be. Also, I do kinda noted that it did remind me of the Bowser's Castle track from the GBA, so that's a bit of an uncanny coincidence, I would say. Piranha Plant Cove 2, however, it's just full of straightaways. Okay, that's not entirely true. There's some split paths, a brief turn, and the jungle is a nice change of pace, but still, it's nothing to write home about, maybe except bouncing on the moray eel? I don't know, what do you want me to say about this one? Piranha Plant Cove 3 is by far more consistent with its layout, and the atmosphere is alright with the sunken ships and hidden ruins, but it's incredibly basic otherwise. Not really helping that Tour's underwater physics suck, so they generally feel rougher to play on. Shoutouts to the moray eel once again though, because this guy actually jump scares you. I love it when that happens. As you can see, I have mixed feelings for all 3 routes, as while I do like a lot of aspects about them, I found my overall experience to be pretty mediocre. I will say that, once again, visually speaking, it's pretty good. Obviously 8 Deluxe blows Tours out of the water, get it? But even on a mobile phone, I still found the track's visuals to be pretty nice. The music is also pretty good as well. It actually might be one of my favorites in the entire game. It fits the underwater ruin setting a lot. Overall, while not my favorite Tour Nitro track, Piranha Plant Cove is a delightful track with many interesting locations to visit, but falls short in how 3 of its locales were executed. Thankfully, this one has a happy ending with its console counterpart being pretty good. And I guess by proxy the originals as well on my most recent playthrough. Hey look, a redemption for myself! Well now, here we have an unexpected favorite of mine. Berlin Byways always stood out to me as being a course I typically get excited for the most, and it's definitely not because King Babam is top tier on one of the variants. While Berlin Byways isn't as ambitious with its locations as courses like Vancouver Velocity and Los Angeles Laps, what makes it up for it is a decent amount of locations and unique obstacles, for the most part. Strangely, the first variant is the second, and while I'll continue to ponder how or why that happened, I couldn't argue about the track we did get first, as it sets up a good first impression with racers driving around the Tiergarten, and a brief visit to the train station where they can actually go inside it naturally, unlike a certain console version. Accompanying the experience is the music, and you know what, I'll let it play for a while. The sweet sounds of techno. I mean, nothing wrong with the 8 Deluxe version, but come on, you can't beat the original. Anyways, the actual first version would later follow afterwards, and while it doesn't offer the same energy as the first, the fact that you go past the Berlin Wall on top of dodging Dwomps is memorable on its own, the former implying the existence of communism. That's pretty fun, even though I get the statement might be a little bit tiresome by now. I had fun with the first 2 tracks, but unfortunately, it all comes down to a crawl with 3. And if you've seen my ranking retro tracks in Mario Kart Tour video, you know how I generally feel about traffic courses in this game, and this is no different. It's just a loop around this portion and nothing else. Mild, boring, passable. Never excited to play this one, but the rest is solid enough, so who am I to complain? Although on the topic of this, not that it relates to Berlin Byways, but I actually found myself liking Mushroom Bridge a little bit more recently, so I mean, that's improvement, I guess. God, the possibility of remaking this entire video scares me. This took an hour to make. Anyways, while not the best city track, it's certainly one that gives off the hype more than any other track, apart from maybe one other.
You know, the Los Angeles dinosaur. The famous Los Angeles dinosaur.
Amongst all of the city tracks, Los Angeles Laps is not only one of the more unexpected choices. I mean, out of all the states in America, you chose California? But it's also the most varied that I've seen, with all 3 routes taking place in different parts of the titular city, as well as LA County. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's take a look at this presentation because, wow. This track definitely screams summer to me with its sunset, and the lighting reflects it fair enough. It's such a unique experience that honestly, I was a bit disappointed to see it change later on. The music, however, is interesting as this version takes more of a synth direction that features the Bacapella as it plays. It still fits the track's overall theme, but it does get a bit grating. This one also got changed, but I do happen to like that version, so it's all good, even at the expense of the boss. As for the routes, LA Laps 1 is by far one of my absolute favorites in this game. Starting at the Santa Monica Pier and jumping onto the shorelands of the beach is a sensation that I can't describe, although I will admit that the final stretch could have been a little more than just straight road. At least a sidestep or something at least. Comparatively, LA Laps 2 is a lot weaker with its overall setting taking place in the Inglewood oil field, clearly a priority in its lap 3. Nice one, Nintendo. There are some split paths and pump jacks that don't harm the player, as well as this ramp here, but otherwise it's just kind of a whatever track. LA Laps 3 thankfully picks up steam, with you going past the Los Angeles Convention Center, and more famously, gliding over to Rogers Stadium, which I think is a pretty cool set piece to have as a gliding section. I'm also a bit partial to driving through the 2 Rodeo Drive. I just like the atmosphere there. While the track does have its fair share of issues, especially things like the absence of the Hollywood sign, which I found to be pretty weird to this day, I can appreciate Los Angeles Labs for having a unique layout for every variation discussed, and combined with the summery atmosphere and bopping music, it makes for one of the better city tracks in Mario Kart Tour. Yeah, I said it. In terms of accuracy to the real deal though, needs more homeless toads. And the Los Angeles dinosaur. We actually need that right now. Oh wait, it's discontinued. Shit.
I come seeking the weed of Olympus!
Hang on a second. Does this count as a city? Whatever. Ascen's Dash takes a different approach when it comes to being a city track, taking place within the ruins of the Acropolis rather than it being in a city for a majority of it. The track was highly praised for that reason alone back when it was first released, but how much of that factor holds up now? Judging by the placement of this track, you might already figure out. But anyways, Ascen's Dash 1 starts off pretty strong with racers dropping off a long slope, choosing to either go to the main path or on top of the pillars. Then, after going round the Theater of Dionysus, follows a cannon shot towards the Hadrian's Arch, and back to the Acropolis. Already, the first variant sets up a good expectation of what's to come, and it only gets better from here as Ascen's Dash 2 starts off in reverse of the original path, which doesn't last long as racers are taken to a glider section that puts them onto a street that resembles Monastiraki. Then after going past the Roman Agora with swarms trying to crush the competition, it leads to this upward part with boulders falling down and an interesting pass. Not sure if it's meant to be a shortcut, but it's interesting nonetheless. It all caps off with racers going under the Bellu Gate and Propylea as they dodge Goombas. While I wouldn't say this one is as good as Ascen's 1, it's still a pretty solid variant all around and I had fun with it. As for Ascen's Dash 3, it unfortunately fell flat. Most of Ascen's Dash 3 is repeated from the second variant with a bit of the first one sprinkled onto it. Really, the only notable part about this track is the drop into the center of the theater and the Odeons of Heroes Acroticus. That was not easy to say. I probably got it wrong, that's like the worst part. It's incredibly underwhelming regardless, especially as one of the last courses released for Tour. In terms of aesthetic and music, well, the music has this grand adventure feeling to it, and I feel like it suits it incredibly well. I still remember being blown away first hearing it back when the track first released, and oh my god, the sensation is unlike anything other I've heard in Mario Kart Tour up until that point. The aesthetic though, well, it ain't great. I mean, not the ruins, that's fine, I guess. But the graphics of Tour really makes this track very unpleasant at times, especially in the background where it has the cities. It looks like Play-Doh, oh my god. Not a very good look. Either way, Ascen's Dash is still a very solid course with two fun variants and a good setting, but lacks in the other one variant and the visual department. I'd imagine this one would also be controversial seeing as how many players adore this course. I just think it's good and nothing more. Now please spare me, I swear to God.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land.
Ah yes, Vancouver Velocity. Now this track is where the city tracks start to really get good back in the day. And even though there have been better since then, I'd still say I like the track, but I'll admit that it doesn't come with its own set of problems, which we will discuss in a bit. Firstly, can we talk about how beautiful this track looks? Even with Mario Kart Tour's simple art style, Vancouver Velocity is visually beautiful with a lot of colorful lights, the Aurora Borealis above the sky. It really fits the winter-fall vibes all around. The music as well is also really good, in fact one of my top music picks in this game. As for the track itself, well, Vancouver Velocity 1 is well beloved for a reason. The track wastes no time by taking racers out of the city and under the Vancouver Olympic Cauldron, leading them to the Suspension Bridge Park, where of course they drive on the Nitro bridge itself before ending on the glider ramp. This is one of my favorite variants for this track and is the clear highlight for Vancouver Velocity. With such a high bar already, it unfortunately goes a bit downhill from there because the other two variants are just very underwhelming in comparison. For instance, Vancouver Velocity 2 takes you through the Rogers Arena before being shot out towards Stanley Park, and while I do love autumn settings normally, this one just kind of felt alright. Not bad, but I'm not in love with it either. Vancouver Velocity 3, however, is just boring. You go through a tunnel, the Vancouver Public Library, and back at Rogers Arena. That's about it. It's so weird how Vancouver got worse for every variant released, yet despite all that, I still like the track as a whole. It may not be S tier worthy, but I can recognize all that it did back when it first launched in 2022. In fact, I think I might be one of the few people that actually like this track now, because I've seen some say it's a bit overrated, and yeah, I can agree, there's not a lot of great things past the first one, but come on, I still think it's a pretty neat track otherwise. As much as I'd love to call it overrated, god damn it, I would be lying if I said I didn't love how this track looks and plays. Singapore Speedway has a lot of interesting attributes about it that makes it one of the most beloved tracks in not only Mario Kart Tour, but also when its console debuted in the Booster Course Pass, be it the sites like the Helix Bridge and Marina Bay Sands, even a Chinatown area. The bright and colorful atmosphere makes this one feel a lot more alive and vibrant, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the music. Lively and energetic, and as a certified Splatoon fan, yes, I'm convinced the vocals are from the Inklings. But how are the tracks themselves? Well, Singapore Speedway 1 starts us off with a straightaway followed by a cannon that shoots us towards the tops of the Marina Bay Sands, accompanied by Goombas and floaties. Aw, that's a bit adorable. All ending in the gliding section past some rings and even a soccer field. And after all that... Wait, the course is finished? Yeah, Singapore 1 is a lot more eventful with the visuals than the gameplay, not to help that the layout itself is just an oval. Thankfully, Singapore Speedway 2 picks up the slack with us gliding over a body of water that shoots 5 colorful geysers and onto a road that takes place within the gardens by the bay, all ending with a drive through the Helix Bridge. This whole sequence might actually be one of my favorite parts of the whole track, and unlike Singapore 1, it's a lot more active here with the twists and turns, as well as the conveyor belts adding in some variety. Singapore Speedway 3 comparatively might also be one of my favorites, with a split path that falls into the Chinatown. It even changes the music whenever you're in that area, which I think is really cool. Nothing much happens otherwise, but I still liked my time there regardless. Despite some gripes that I've had with the first variant, Singapore Speedway is a great course overall that, while not my personal favorite, I can get behind with its lively atmosphere, music, and layout. And I have a hunch that due to its reception in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I think this one will be one of the most beloved tour tracks in all of Mario Kart. Unless, you know, you hate the city tracks, then oops.
Why isn't it possible? It's just not. Why not, you stupid?
Piranha Plant Pipeline. You know, for a course that seemingly looks less ambitious on the surface, it's actually surprisingly good with it having a good utilization of half pipes, split paths, and fuzzies. Oh my gosh, fuzzies. Steve Gaming reference. I sure do hope it mixes into the Booster Course path. Oh. Yeah, so out of every track in this video, Piranha Plant Pipeline is the only one that has not been brought over to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This was kind of shocking too, at least the community wondering the fate of this revised quote-unquote scrapped DS track. And you know what? Perhaps we should give it all the attention it needs after being left out in favor of either Daisy Circuit or Rosalina's Ice World. Listen, as much as I like those two tracks, let's be real, I feel like we'd be better off without them. Now, initially, I was a bit mixed on the track, as while I didn't think it was awful by any means, it definitely felt a bit jank-like with the curvy nature of the pipes on top of the controls. However, as I played more of it, I started to like the flow of Pipeline. Things like the half pipes felt really natural to take, and I absolutely love the split paths you can take, with one path leading to a clear pipe filled with cobwebs, and the other leading to a moving pipe that sways, all culminating into a section where you dodge fuzzies, drive underwater, and then jump out of the pipe. All this from a seemingly basic looking idea, and it's executed beautifully. In terms of atmosphere and music, well, the former is just fine. It mostly takes place within the pipes, but sections like the exposed underground when doing the half-pipe tricks and the canyon are some standouts. The music though, very frantic, and somehow it manages to be a bop as well. How do you even manage that? I will admit, I could see this as a bit irritable at times, but besides that, I think the music is pretty good. It's such a shame that this track is only available year-round for 2 weeks, because Piranha Plant Pipeline is a really great track that taps into some of the potential that Dokkan Course presented, even if really that track was likely meant to be a test of the physics of Mario Kart DS, I think. I better see this track come back ASAP, Nintendo, or so help me out!
Hey, I wanna ride the Yoshi.
The minute I heard word spreading about a Yoshi's Island track coming to Mario Kart Tour, I was pretty excited. I didn't have to wait for long as it was released first in 8 Deluxe, and I absolutely loved it there. Naturally, it would eventually come to Mario Kart Tour, and I also love it here as well, just not to the same extent as before. Yoshi's Island is a beloved tribute to the SNES game of the same name, giving a condensed yet varied view of the many locales of the titular island, from the flowery fields to the dark castle caverns, all the way high into the sky. There's never a dull moment with this track. even complete with its residents as well, like Stilt Guys, Huffin' Puffins, and Goonies. The layout itself is pretty simple, I will admit that, but I don't mind it as much when the execution of the track is superb. Heck, it even changes the starting theme and results theme to be like Yoshi's Island. Now, granted, we've heard that first in 8 Deluxe, but even still, it's such a neat detail that they didn't have to do. Except, well, in circumstances like challenges and the coin challenge, for some reason that doesn't play. I'm just going to assume it's an oversight, but regardless, Yoshi's Island is a wonderful track and a loving tribute to the Super Nintendo classic. But there is a reason why the 8 Deluxe version is a little better, and not just the controls. Considering that the track is on a mobile device, some aspects like the moving cloud are gone, and I will admit, the graphics do look a bit dull when compared to the console version. Although for some reason in this one, snow is here. Oh, wait, what the fuck? Even with that, Yoshi's Island still remains as one of my absolute favorite courses from Mario Kart Tour, whether it's in this list or in general. Please make this one a priority whenever it does reappear someday, Nintendo, because we can all agree that Yoshi's Island has quickly become one of the most beloved tracks in all of Mario Kart in recent memory. We better see that return and not some track like, I don't know, Merry Mountain. If you were to tell me years ago that there would be a Mario Kart track that takes place inside of a bathroom, I'd look at you crazy. I mean, the concept already sounds bizarre enough, but much like Yoshi's Island, which I forgot to mention was data mined before, which got us hyped about it, the elusive bathroom track, which also got leaked, would be unveiled in the Nintendo Direct for Wave 5 of the Booster Course Pass. And I and many others were blown away. The amount of creativity shown within that track is just impeccable, more so than GBA Ribbon Road in 8. Debatably, of course. I did enjoy my time with it in 8 Deluxe, but it can feel a bit jank at times, especially in certain sections. How's the original though? Does it fare any better? Well, it's still just as good as the console version, but, and I can't believe I'm saying this is one of the very rare times where the original beats out the 8 Deluxe version. Don't get me wrong, that version visually looks the best. I prefer its music over Tour's, and the controls are far more suitable, but I don't know, I just like the way it controls in Tour far more, with it being less janky than in 8 Deluxe. It includes some ramps that weren't present there, on top of the general atmosphere being as impressive with racers going in the bathtub, down the drain, on the floor with soapy off-road, all the way up past the toilet where it kinda adjusts itself in Tour rather than activating by lap 2. While the Tour version edges out the 8 Deluxe version by a small smidge, I still enjoy both tracks just as equally, and it's a real shame that this lovely bathroom rush only comes once a year now. Once again reminding me that Nintendo should have put a free play mode in this game to make it more convenient, but of course, they didn't do such a thing. Oh well, at least I could play this course in the comfort of my own Switch, unlike a certain pipeline. Oh wait, I have a modded Switch now. Yeah!
I couldn't stand it. I was going
Crazy. I decided to pull out my big snake and start strangling it.
Bangkok Rush, baby! Woo! I love Bangkok Rush. Oh my god, it's so good. I bet $10 that Ouija Maro's pointing a rifle in my head right now is about to commit a JFK. Sorry about that. Ever since I first played it, Bangkok Rush has solidified itself as one of my all-time favorite city tracks in Mario Kart Tour. And even now, I still find it enjoyable with a lot of variety within the tracks themselves, great atmosphere with the orange sunset, and the music being pretty good as well. But what makes this track so special compared to other ones like, you know, Vancouver Velocity or Singapore Speedway? Well, I'll show you. Bangkok Rush 1 almost immediately starts off with the racers driving on the Chao Phraya River, followed by a visit of the Mekong Railway Market, before ending in either the underside or on the BTS Skytrain, with the former having you dodging inky piranha plants. Already, there's a lot to take in within that first variant, and it sets itself as a good first impression of the overall tracks. I mean, I'll be honest, when I first saw the inky piranha plants playing this one, I was like, there was no way they actually referenced this little guy from 3D Land. Of course, he's been in other games before, but like, it's still cool to see nonetheless. But it gets even better. As while Bangkok Rush 2 and 3 essentially take you through the streets with tuk-tuks, the former leads into a jump from a parking lot and bouncing on top of the tents of the train night market Ratchada, while the latter instead has you gliding past the giant swing and democracy monument. That's a lot for a track like this, and while I'm not super big on 3 as much, I still think it's a really good track regardless. Bangkok Rush has many to offer, from interesting landmarks to obstacles like inky piranha plants. I never have a dull time with one of my favorite tracks ever in Mario Kart Tour, which is why I'll never forgive its 8 Deluxe counterpart for basically ruining it, like its dulled sunset, no inky piranha plants to having these stupid N64 Royal Raceway plants. Sorry. But despite my love for it, Bangkok Rush has actually been dethroned as my favorite tour track. Well, doesn't that sound familiar, but what could be number 1 to those that haven't been paying attention up until now? Well, let me tell you, the best track of all of Mario Kart Tour is, funnily enough, the last original track of the game. Madrid Drive. Where do I start? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that it handles the city track concept the best out of every track in Tour? I know that sounds like a bold statement, seeing as people would usually rank Vancouver Velocity, Hudson Stash, and especially Singapore Speedway way above this track, but something about the way it's been handled in Tour just feels right. It makes it not only one of the very best, but also one of the most overlooked tracks in the game for me, and I want to give it the recognition it deserves. I'll admit, I wasn't particularly excited to see this track when it was first shown, especially given that it's another European course, and I would have loved to see Cairo or Mexico be represented instead. But after playing through all 3 versions and taking the time to process my thoughts, it pleasantly surprised me in the best ways possible. To start, the music. This track does not disappoint with its more frantic tempo, and especially captures the Spanish vibe so well. Making it better is that it has not 1, but 2 different versions for both the stadium and museum, which we'll talk about in a bit. And while I'm not as impressed with the atmosphere as much, I still think it looks distinctive and interesting, especially the plaza with the tables in 3 and wigglers roaming about in 2. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, there is a shocking amount of things to go over, probably because it's one of the last tracks to ever be released in Tour proper, and I guess Nintendo wanted to make a strong final impression. I'm not a theorist, but pushing that aside, Madrid Drive 1 sets out a really decent first impression, which doesn't seem like much from a glance considering that the most you'll see are a couple of Goombas and a shortcut. It quickly shifts though, as you enter through the Santiago Bernabeu Stadium, where Goomba shoes are kicking footballs. It may be late, but it definitely makes an impression in the best ways possible, and luckily enough, the other 2 variants are pretty consistent with each other. Madrid Drive 2, while my least favorite out of the 3, is still a fairly solid track with you gliding over the ponds of Retiro Park and dodging wigglers in the Plaza Mayor. Even if the track itself goes in reverse, I still think Madrid Drive 2 is decently solid for what it's worth, and I definitely had a good time playing it. Now with Madrid Drive 3, this track caps it off on a high note, not only by revisiting the Plaza Mayor on a different layout, but also visiting new places, such as drifting inside the Atocha station and taking the sides of the Prado Museum, where one of the paintings seems suspiciously real. Maybe that's just me. I mean, art has many forms, but either way, Madrid Drive 3 really delivers on a lot of areas that keeps me excited, and as the final track ever to be released in Tour, I'd say it sends the game's content off on a grander note. It's easy to tell how much I really like Madrid Drive, from its unique settings and locations across 3 of its variants to the Spanish-filled music that really suits the overall atmosphere. Without a doubt, this track is not only my favorite city track, but also one of my general favorite Nitro courses in all of Mario Kart Tour. And that concludes the entire ranking of every single Nitro course that Mario Kart Tour has to offer. And I have to say, compared to the previous one where I ranked all of the retro courses, this still took a bit of time, and I did have to address the remix courses considering that I wasn't going to make an entirely different video about them, but nonetheless, all of the effort has truly paid off in what I consider these 2 to be my magnum opus for this channel. And the video's result isn't out of obligation either. I just know that there's not really going to be as many videos about this particular ranking as much as more other general Mario Kart games. And that's just because, well, as unfortunate as is, Mario Kart Tour is not really everyone's cup of tea. It's often considered to be the worst game of the series by many, whether or not it's because if it's a mobile game, it has microtransactions and its rocky history, or the controls just kind of become a turnoff point for most people. And initially I felt the same way, but when I replayed Mario Kart Tour months after I dropped it, I started to understand the game a bit. Sure, it's not like a traditional Mario Kart game, and I wouldn't put it as my top 3 Mario Karts of all time, but I still appreciated this game for all it really did for everything else. For bringing in retro tracks that would never see the light of day, introducing us to new concepts of city courses, and even some original tracks based on the Mushroom Kingdom, and I guess most importantly, bringing us the Booster Course Pass, which thinking in retrospect might have actually done some damage to it, but I don't know, I think the Booster Course Pass is a fine enough DLC, so who am I to complain? In any way, I like to take my stance of Mario Kart Tour as a game that's just generally way too overhated, despite its criticisms being pretty valid. Again, this is not my favorite Mario Kart game ever, but I can certainly appreciate it. It's always a game I often come back to when I just didn't really feel like playing a proper game like Double Dash or 8 Deluxe. But that's all I really have to say on the matter, and without any word salts to describe, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching. The entire series of these Mario Kart Tour videos have been pretty interesting to say the least. From the beginnings of complaining about Airship Fortress being having lava instead of just being sky, to complaining about battle mode being a lackluster experience, all the way to ranking every single retro track, nitro track, and even remix track in the entirety of the game, it has certainly been quite a wild ride, and one that I absolutely do not regret in the slightest. But as unfortunate as it may sound, there is little to no reason to ever talk about this game ever again. I mean, sure, there's other topics I could discuss, such as ranking all costumes and whatnot, but even so, there really isn't much for me to talk about with this game anymore, especially knowing that Nintendo stopped producing content for it at least a year ago. So with that, there really isn't much for me to say, and that really closes a chapter to this whole Mario Kart Tour saga that I've wasn't intending on keeping going towards, but hey, things happen. I wouldn't be really surprised if you guys just know me as the guy that really enjoys Mario Kart Tour while also enjoying a lot of other aspects about every Mario Kart game. I guess even Super Mario Kart 2 in extent, but I wouldn't go that far. Either way, I really have nothing more to say about this, so all I can really say is, once again, thank you Mario Kart Tour for everything that you've done, but it's time to move forward. I'm pretty sure the Mario Kart craze has kind of died down for a while, and we probably won't be getting the next game until the next system, which is more than likely going to happen next year. So with that, I leave with this. What are you guys' thoughts on the city tracks, the original tracks, or even the remix tracks of Mario Kart Tour, whether or not it's from the originals or from 8 Deluxe? And are you upset at me for not putting Merry Mountain in S tier? Let me know down in the comments below. And with everything all said and done, I will be going now. Remember that Stu cares about you, and you all have a good day. See you guys then.